And hello, everybody. It is Tom Chenault. It's my little boy, Adrian, and it is the Legacy Leadership Radio Show. And you have probably heard about all I'm going to say on this show, because this show is so far above my pay grade, you're going to flip out. We have got the best guest, and he's a partner of that guy named Brad Feld that we had on a while ago that had written this tremendous book. I can't even figure it out, called Give First. And these guys are legends in business all over the world, but really legends in Boulder County and our hometown of Longmont. And I love them with all my heart, because they exemplify doing good first. They have spent their career with Techstars, the Foundry group, all the things that they've done to help entrepreneurs start their businesses from literally nothing. They kick in expertise, they kick in money. They have been unbelievable. But then Seth's wife, this incredible woman, Greeley Sachs, has been buying downtown Longmont and all those beautiful buildings down there. She is putting incredible businesses that have to pass the muster test of being kind in there. You go to Juniper Goods all the time, don't you?
I live at Juniper Goods.
You live there.
I love it.
And it's a couple of Waldorf parents.
Yeah.
So whenever I walk in there, because our little boy went from kindergarten through 12th grade, which is unheard of at Boulder, Shining Mountain Waldorf School.
Yeah.
And so everybody knows each other around being good people. And what basically Seth and his great wife are doing is funding that. Now take over, Adrian, and bring Seth to the party.
Awesome. We are super excited to have Seth Levine here on the show today. He has an awesome new book out called Capital Evolution, really going deep on where the economy and really kind of where the world is going in a time when it feels like it's changing at such just a gobsmacking pace that I think even those of us who are close to it, even those of us who are excited about it, still are just having a hard time really understanding how this all plays out. And Seth and his co-author Elizabeth McBride put together an incredible book talking about all of that. And it's super exciting to have you on the show. So Seth, welcome to Legacy Leadership. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I love talking about the work my wife is doing. So thank you. I get no credit for that. I joke. Juniper is leases the building. She redid that building, but she also owns Composition Shop, which is the new bookstore in downtown Longmont. And it's not even really a joke. It actually is true. I'm the shop intern. I put it up on LinkedIn. That's kind of my role. I specialize in recycling management and flat pack furniture assembly. So
that is fantastic.
It's amazing, right? I mean, it's Juniper for books, right? It's this lovely space.
It truly is. And
we spent all our Christmas money at that shop.
You did. I know. I'm the beneficiary.
We love that place. So congratulations on that too. And that old guy that has got such history in book. I love that guy. It's just anybody that lives anywhere in Colorado needs to go to that beautiful, beautiful bookstore.
I will say several people have said to us that it's the nicest bookstore in the state of Colorado. And
no question.
I can believe that. It's really pretty cool. And it's downtown Longmont, right? Like, living loco, which is great. And it's a destination. I do know some other things that are happening downtown as well that we're not allowed to talk about quite yet, but there's more to come, right? Both in terms of what Greeley's working on, but also in some other spaces. And I think she and we really care a lot about our hometown, right? We've lived in Longmont for 22 years now. And she's lived even longer than that, because she lived here for a while, but even before she and I met. And she's really trying to sort of do right by downtown. And it's funny. We did like the book launch event at Composition Shop, obviously. And some people hadn't been downtown in a while, like in 5 or 10 years. And it's really different than it used to be, right? There's great restaurants, there's tons of shops. The turkey processing plant is gone. It's now probably the best pizza place in the state, in Urban Field. Like, there's so much more going on. It was really surprising to people. I loved it. I was like, get out of the Boulder bubble, guys. Come to Longmont.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. So I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about some big picture stuff. And I want to then kind of bring it back around to the local, because I actually think that's a beautiful microcosm of some of the ideas that you guys talk about in the book, in terms of like we could talk all these kind of highfalutin things about how the economy does this or does that, but like the rubber meets the road in the communities that we live in. And I think Longmont has some really interesting kind of case studies around that. So let's kind of circle back to that. But I'd love just to, if you would, give like just a quick intro to kind of the concept of capital evolution and the idea of dynamic capitalism, just to kind of set the table, and then we'll go a little bit deeper there.
Yeah. So capital evolution asks the question, what's the future of capitalism, right? Is there a future for capitalism? And the book serves in part as a defense of capitalism, right? We're talking about that now as a country. We just swore in a socialist as the mayor of the largest city in the country, the financial capital of the world. Yeah. There's a real debate going on about whether capitalism is working and working for enough people. I think that the debate should not be between capitalism and socialism. Even a very cursory read of history suggests that socialism has never worked ever in the history of the world. And I don't even want to say others might argue differently. Like, I actually don't think there's a historical argument other than that. There may be a future argument that somehow no one who's ever tried it has done it the right way. But in any event, I actually don't think that's the real debate we should be having. We should be talking about what kind of capitalism do we want to have? And that's the question we ask in the book. Now, we do start the book, chapter 3, by asking, is capitalism exploitative, right? Irredeemable by nature? And so we do kind of talk through that and give some voice to some of the counter arguments, because we want to make a real argument for why it's important. But then we talk about how we've lived under one style of capitalism for the last 50 years, neoliberalism, Washington consensus, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. It's the type of capitalism that Milton Friedman outlined in his book from the late 60s and his article in the New York Times in 1970 that described the sole purpose of a corporation is to make money for its shareholders. And in our book, we really talk about how, well, one, that was never really the case. I mean, companies are run by people, and people are, confusing emotions, and they make decisions for all sorts of different reasons, some of which they recognize, some of which they don't. But we talk about how that's not been working, right? And we outline maybe a slightly different form of capitalism. We call it dynamic capitalism, not that different than what perhaps the Business Roundtable had in mind in 2019 when it said, hey, wait a minute, these are the CEOs of the largest companies in the United States. And they said, actually, there are other stakeholders that we care about in our businesses: employees, the environment, suppliers, community. And we actually do take those other constituents in mind when we make decisions. And so dynamic capitalism kind of outlines that, right? It takes a longer term view towards decision making versus a very short term, like quarter by quarter style view. It talks about a role for government, but a pretty limited role for government, right? Let's not ask government to try to do too much. Talks a lot about empowering an ownership economy. How do we create more capitalists? I think what we saw in New York and what we see in other places is people feel like they don't have a step on the rung of the ladder of success. And when you don't feel like you've got any stake in the market economy, you want stuff, right? And politicians that promise things are very appealing, right? I mean, of course, the Margaret Thatcher quote, I think, comes into play here, right? Where the problem with communism is that eventually you run out of other people's money to take. And I think they're going to find that that's true with some of these ideas that they have in New York and elsewhere, which is maybe why in some cities like San Francisco, Minneapolis, where they elected people that were democratic socialists, in a cycle or 2 cycles ago, they've now come back to more kind of centrist politicians, because their ideas, unfortunately, didn't work, and in many cases were complete disasters. And so they've kind of come back. I hope that doesn't happen exactly that way in New York, because it's such an important city for the country. But anyway, so that's what dynamic capitalism kind of talks about, and the book is, I think, written very accessibly. I mean, one of the things that Elizabeth and I noted when we were thinking about this subject was most of the books that talk about the future of capitalism were very sort of academic and cerebral, and not very accessible. I think you did it. So well done, because they're not easy concepts to package in a way that are accessible. And I think you guys did that. So there's 2
like huge things that hit me like a ton of bricks when I read this book. One is in the intro, you shared a statistic that I still can't believe it, having read it over and over again. So it says that between 1978 and 2018, CEO compensation increased by more than 900%. That part I believe. While worker compensation rose by just 11.9%. And so that's part one. That totally knocked me over. The second thing, and I think really illustrates this, and I want to talk about this idea of like just like the wage part of the economy, is you share this story about, I think, the incoming president of PayPal who comes in, he takes over, and he's like, I'm going to kind of figure out what's the state of the union of our employees. We pay, at or above market. So we're just going to kind of survey, kind of see what's going on. And they did this huge survey, and people came back and they said that there's people who are working full-time for PayPal who are having to donate plasma weekly to make ends meet in addition to their full-time income, because there's this situation where they're paying the market rate for labor, and yet the market rate for labor is just like vastly not getting it done. And that's a huge deal. And I think it remains the case to this day. I'm curious if you agree. And that's something that I think speaks to how serious a situation we're already in before any of this AI stuff comes along. What did you guys find as you dug into some of that data about the situation that sort of middle-class workers find themselves in?
Yeah, let me set the table first, and then we'll talk about Dan Schulman and PayPal specifically, sure. Because that was, I thought, a really powerful story. But so what happened in our economy over the last 50 years, as we started to focus only on shareholders and shareholder value, is that everything between revenue and profit became something to be extracted from, right? And we treat the middle class, we treat workers kind of like we've treated the environment for many years, which is a resource to be extracted from. And I think that what you see in the statistic, 12%, that's 12% total, right, increase in wages, is exactly that, right? How do we minimize our expenses? We outsource, all of the things that happened sort of through the 90s that turned out to not just gut the middle class, but also gutted communities, right? And we did it to our own peril, right? Now we're trying to reshore a bunch of manufacturing in the offshore, because it turned out that maybe some things that could be a little bit cheaper to make in China, actually we for strategic reasons still want to be able to make them here in the United States, right? Whether that's inputs to chips or saline bags, things like that, right? As we found out during COVID. But it's interesting, if you look back 50 or 60 years ago, and we actually have a chart later in the book that describes this, the percentage of revenue that is distributed in the form of wages to workers was significantly higher, right? I mean, it's gone way down. Now, we're not suggesting that companies should hire more workers, right? And hire more workers than they need specifically. But we need to at least acknowledge that these are trends that are taking shape in our economy. And to your point, before we even get to the AI discussion, and that we need to think about other mechanisms for allowing them to participate in the success of their labor, which is in part why we argue so forcefully for an ownership economy. And we tell some stories, we'll probably talk more about it later, but in particular, Pete Stavros from KKR, not exactly, some liberal bastion, right? I mean, literally the Barbarians at the Gate movie was based on, their hostile of takeover RJR Nabisco. But Pete's been experimenting with these employee ownership programs in the manufacturing PE division of KKR, which is a large private equity firm. And he's been having incredible success, right? It turns out when people have a stake in their, in the ultimate success and outcome of their businesses, that it's not even work harder. They work differently. They participate differently. They come up with different suggestions. They, think about how to advance manufacturing lines differently. And so, I think that those are all important aspects to what we talk about. Now back to Dan Schulman, and it'll be interesting. So Dan was the CEO of PayPal when we spoke to him. He's now just been hired in the last couple of months to be the CEO of Verizon, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, which is so two things about that are interesting. One is clearly the board of Verizon understood who Dan Schulman was, right? He's not been shy about his views about this sort of stuff that he talked to us about and others. So they hired him deliberately, not in spite of that, but because of his views, right? And two, of course, I mean, PayPal's a pretty big company, but Verizon's an even bigger company. It'll be interesting to see how he implements some of his ideas. But so he tells the story. We recount it. It's early in the book. I think it's chapter 2. We recount how he thought everything was fine. He said, when we talked to him, he said to us, yeah, like, I believe in the free markets. Like, I was paying the prevailing wage and then some. And I assumed everyone was fine. But it turned out actually that wasn't the case. And the result for us was higher turnover, disengaged employees, sick employees, et cetera. And so they actually worked with some nonprofits. They came up with essentially a scale to measure net disposable income. And they increased not just wages, but also some healthcare benefits to make sure they got everyone up to an acceptable NDI number. And it completely changed sort of the relationship that people had with PayPal. And keep in mind, PayPal has not just a bunch of white collar workers, it's a tech company, but they also had a lot of people in call centers, things like that. And so it's a really compelling story for why thinking in the slightly longer term actually is beneficial to the bottom line, again, over a longer term period.
I loved that. And I think specifically that thinking around healthcare as just being such an unbelievably leveraged pinch point on, I mean, even the middle class, let alone the lower middle class. I mean, it's unbelievable, the state of affairs of that. And for companies to be able to step in and maybe exert some of their own leverage to be able to do some things where they can kind of disproportionately solve that problem for people who can't afford to do it for themselves is a huge deal.
Yeah. Do you know Eric Wallace from Left Hand Brewery?
I met him in passing, but
you know, he did that complete. He gave that whole business of his. Everybody was trying to acquire him, and he said, "This is not a deal that is good for my people. It's good for me, and I'm not going to let that happen." And he has turned that Left Hand Brewery into a community of partners that is just absolutely unbelievable. We got to get you a cup of coffee with him because you guys are thinking on the same plane, and it's just beautiful to see.
Yeah. And his business partner, Mark Lupa, is also a longtime Boulder guy who's fantastic. And, you know, look, one of the things we talk about is that private companies have a bit more leeway, Left Hand's a private business, in sort of doing these sorts of things. Public companies actually don't. And it's a real shortcoming of corporate law that allows some business judgment, right? There's some allowance for that for boards of directors to make decisions, but it kind of stops when someone comes to knocking on your door and says, "Hey, I want to buy you." And you get a little bit more, not totally, but a little bit more hemmed in as a board of directors in terms of what you can do. And I think that's unfortunate. Again, you know, I think that's related to short-term thinking versus medium or long-term thinking, right? And I think there are lots of great businesses, Left Hand is an example of one, that are run by people who have very specific views about how they want to treat employees and how they want to have their employees participate in the success, ownership of the business. And there are lots and lots of models that show that, you know, frankly, just it creates better outcomes for all shareholders, right? Your new employee shareholders as well as the other shareholders. Again, KKR wouldn't be doing this. They're not giving money away at KKR, right? They're doing this because they think it's the right thing to do. Now, Pete believes in it. Pete Stavros, who's sort of the pioneer of this at KKR and the evangelist for it, believes in it deeply. And I think part of that's because, I mean, we had a chance to talk to him as well. We talked to some really interesting people in researching this book, but his parents were blue collar workers. His dad was a construction foreman, right? And we tell the story in the book, but his dad was like, I was like not incented to work too hard because then we finished up work and I didn't get paid for that last hour. But I was also sort of sometimes at odds with sort of management, right? And, you know, they would order supplies they stopped paying us for the lunch hour, but then supplies would show up during the lunch hour and they would want us to unload the supplies. And we're like, well, but you said you're not going to pay us for lunch hour. So we're not going to accept these supplies over lunch. I mean, it's just stuff that if you were like an owner of the business, like you would say, nah, it doesn't make any sense. Right. And I think, again, Pete, growing up watching this, hearing these stories from his dad, was like, I don't want people thinking that way. Right. I want people thinking, how do I do this in a way that's most efficient? that's best, not just for the bottom line, but also for the employees. So how do I turn those employees both into people that earn a wage, but also, earn ownership?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really liked that topic around ownership. Before we go there, I want to talk about the wage part of this specifically, and I'm curious your thoughts. You've had things like unions in the past. I'll confess I've always had kind of a like cynical view of unions as a way to get things to as the way to solve a problem. But you have this kind of situation where we have structurally priced labor at a place that doesn't work relative to the cost of goods. And outside of sort of ownership economy stuff, which I think is a great way to solve some of this problem, do you see a path to wages resetting to a place that makes sense relative to the cost of living?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think, Adrian, that like I have very mixed views about union. Like the concept makes sense. Like, should workers be able to come together and say, hey, how do we work as a group, to negotiate with management? And then the problem is, like every bureaucracy, it creates its own, sort of self-fulfilling whatever challenges, and ends up being corrupt. And I'm not saying every union is corrupt, but like it has ended up being somewhat corrupt. Sure. And you end up with these perversities, right? I mean, if you really want a frustrating book to read about unions, read The Box, right, which is the history of the shipping container and the 30-year period when we had this like significantly better, less expensive way of shipping goods, and yet we would pay longshoremen to unload things from a shipping container and then put them back in because the unions would refuse to let the ship dock. Like there's a better way to do that, and there is. I think we need to be able to treat workers with respect, but also say, hey, we're not going to need this style of labor anymore. Let's figure out something else for you to do, retraining, et cetera. And I think we did a bad job of that in the 90s. And as we eventually, I'm sure we'll talk about AI in this conversation, as we think about AI, I think we want to talk about how do we learn from some of the mistakes of what happened in the manufacturing world, gutting, the Rust Belt. And apply that to the next time we see these sort of big job disruptions. But I think that there is a very solid argument for, and we've seen this actually a little bit over the last handful of years, right? They're like workers are winning some of these battles, right? SEIU had a big win. The strike in Hollywood, the writers' strike, is a good example of groups of wage earners coming together and saying, hey, we want better terms. That's actually kind of a good analogy to ownership, because their back end points are kind of like owning their work. Yeah. But there have been a handful of those wins recently, and I think that speaks to, I mean, some of that's just supply and demand, right? With unemployment at 4%, 3.x%. Labor has more power, if you will. And I think they're using that power to sort of, increase wages in an appropriate way, right? Obviously, huge spikes in wages just ultimately get eaten up by inflation. And that's not what we want, right? So, there's a balance here, but absolutely, I think that's right. And I see it in the businesses around us. I see it in my wife's work, right? Trying to both find the right businesses to be in each of those spaces. She's taking a longer term view to the real estate that she's developing. She's not necessarily, there's banks that would love to be in some of those spaces that, and would pay more. And she's like, that's not what we need to create a vibrant downtown. Yeah. And I'd rather make a little less money today, but create this vibrancy and really participate in Longmont coming back, ultimately making that up in terms of building value. But even if she doesn't, I think she's really committed to that as the idea. Like, it's okay to make a little bit less money, but be doing the right thing. And by the way, creating a downtown that she and I and you guys as well want to go walk up and down Main Street. We also did a lot of our Christmas shopping, basically all of it, downtown this year. Like, that's what we want. So, I think all of these things can absolutely be true at the same time.
That little shop you own that little shop next to Juniper Goods. That lady waits for me on Christmas Eve because she knows she's going to win the lottery, because I just walk in and have her fill the bag and rip me off, and it's awesome. But
that is a great shop. That's not Greeley's building, though. She owns Juniper, and then the little building behind it, which hopefully will be a wine bar pretty soon.
Okay,
cool.
that's
Nice.
cool. What you guys don't know is these people are unbelievable at a level. You're hearing about the head guy at PayPal and now at Verizon and the KKR and the people that they know. I met Brad Feld when I was a host of a show called Business for Breakfast, where during rush hour, 3 hours every morning, I looked down on the stock market like it was a football game and just had a blast interviewing people like Brad and people on Wall Street. And we were blown away by Brad. And then Brad hooked us up with what's going on at Foundry. And then they hooked us up with something called Defy Ventures. And Defy Ventures had, and Seth was involved with this, and David Cohen and one other guy, and I can't remember
Jason Middleton.
Jason.
Yeah. And his wife is the board chair. It's now called Breakthrough.
We went down to Canyon City at the request of Brad and Foundry and Seth and these guys, and sat with those inmates that were never getting out of jail to develop a program called Entrepreneurs in Training, EIT or something like that. And Denise went too. It was insane. But what I love about these guys is they are connected at the very top. And it is mind-blowing how many people and what they've done in the world, but they've never forgotten us little guys at the bottom. And I just want you guys to buy this book because it is unbelievable. Buy Brad Feld's book and come to Composition Copy Shop, because this is what it's all about, to bring this country and this world back to right thinking, which is about other human beings. And the reason I wore this shirt is it says belong. It's BLTS, like a bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich. But I look for people that belong in my tribe, that know I love them, that know they can trust me and they're safe with me. And if we get the world, and your book talks so much about trust, all we need to do is stop getting out of the worry and into faith and trust of each other instead of suspicion and conspiracy, and we all win, right, Seth?
Yeah, I love that. That's so well put, Tom. Let me frame it in a similar way, but sort of like one of the things that's really frustrated me, two things that have really frustrated me about sort of our current state of affairs. One is we're constantly stuck in what I would call the politics of grievance. Right? Who do you, there's some problem in your life. Who should you blame? Right? Not how do we collectively help you as a community, empower yourself, better yourself, change your station in life, whatever it is. It's no, who's to blame? Right? If you're on the right, that's immigrants, people that weren't born here, whatever it is. If you're on the left, it's, rich people who are, whatever, taking things from you that should be giving more to you. You shouldn't have debt. You shouldn't have to pay for college. You shouldn't have to pay for buses or whatever it is, right? There's always someone else to blame. And that really is frustrating. And I think the offshoot of that is that we've developed a society where everyone thinks, or too many people are thinking in zero sum, right? It is just, if I win, someone else loses. And that's not the American dream. It's not the history of America. And it ultimately doesn't work, right? Like we spend so much time arguing over how to divide the pie. We forget to talk about how do we grow a bigger pie? How do we create a dynamic economy, an economy that allows people to increase their station in life? And I think people don't really recognize how far away from that we've gotten, right? 50 years ago, if you were born in the bottom 25th percentile of wealth, you had a 25% chance of dying in the top 25th percentile of wealth, sort of based on the history, right? Today, if you're born today in the bottom 25th percentile, you have a 5% chance of getting the top 25th percentile. We are losing American dynamism, which has really been the thing that separated our economy. And we talk about this, the very end of the book, there's a chapter that I can't remember what it's called, but it's something about reclaiming American dynamism. And that's what we really talk about, is like, how do we get back to an economy that actually is more dynamic? Right. And there's two sides to the dynamic coin, right? There is the sort of positive mobility side, but there's also the recognition that like part of a dynamic economy is companies being born and dying, right? With being careful about monopolies and government favors and things like that. Part of a dynamic economy is a certain amount of turnover in the job force and being accepting of that, but also having structures in place to allow people to both survive it, but also then ultimately retrain and get other jobs, right? And I think those are the things that I care about. Certainly when I lobby politicians and things like that, like that's the kind of stuff I talk about, right? I don't really want to argue about, should the top tax rate be 36 or 37%, whatever it is, right? Like I want to talk about how do we spend our money in government money ways that make sense, and how do we keep government out of the way of business, and how do we create programs that incent the kind of business behavior that we're looking for, right? More businesses, more ability to start things. And I think we've gotten away from that. By the way, we've really gotten away from that in Colorado. We're the 6th highest regulated state in the country, which makes absolutely no sense. It's not particularly easy to start a business here, right? So I've been certainly doing my fair share of lobbying. Polis, the current governor, knows I feel this way.
Jared, he knows this stuff. Come on.
Of course, right? He's a tech guy. We all knew him from back when he was a tech person in Boulder. But I know that both Michael Bennett and Phil Weiser are talking about this as well, right? And they care about it. And I think we need to address it.
Yeah. So we're in a revolutionary time in a lot of ways, but specifically, you think about kind of the Industrial Revolution, and now we are in what I can't think you could say any other way of describing it than the AI revolution. Yep. And it is going to have as big and I would argue a bigger impact than any previous wave that we have seen in terms of what that's going to do to the employment force and just the way that we think about what it means to earn a living in the world going forward. And you guys talked a lot about how when these displacements have happened in the past, what we have done to respond, and a lot of examples that maybe serve now as counter examples of it didn't work out the way that we thought it might. So talk about where you see things going and what you see as some ways that we might respond in helping our, this is where we talk about, let's just talk about Longmont or talk about the wider, local community here. Like, what can we be doing to kind of help the people around us to prepare and navigate through some really turbulent waters?
Yeah. So the first and most important thing is to take a step back and take a breath, right? I think it's very easy, and there's a lot of history to this. I'll recount a little bit of it here in a sec, to look at new technology and be scared of it, right? Because there's a lot of unknown. And I'm not saying that it won't be disruptive, although I am a techno optimist. I think ultimately it will be better. But every new technology has been very scary, right? When the automobile came out, you used to have to hire a person to carry an orange flag. They were called flaggers, to walk in front of your car to warn pedestrians because it was so scary, right? Now, obviously, that somewhat negates the power of the car, right? Like the whole point is that you can get from point A to point B, and you don't need to have all this overhead. But I recount that story because that's an example. Like, we take cars for granted. They're not scary. It's easy. By the way, I'm old enough, Adrian, you're younger, but Tom, you'll remember this. Like, when the internet came out, people were like, oh my God, it's going to, completely change everything. No one's ever going to go to a brick and mortar store again. Right now, we know that now it did change the landscape for brick and mortar, but people go shopping all the time, right? It's not like it completely killed retail. And so, but there were prognostications that would happen, right? Every new big technology shift has felt very scary and then eventually gets normalized, right? We walk down the street today, and if I'm talking to myself, and maybe you can't see this little thing in my ear, but everyone just knows you're on the cell phone, right? 60 years ago, you were crazy. Right? Or even 35 years ago, you were crazy. And so, what was thought of as, aberrant behavior eventually becomes normalized, with new technology. So I want to just say that, like, off the top, because I think it's very easy to be like, oh my God, all jobs are going away. And I don't think that that's true. I also believe that people want to work, right? I think that I sometimes I have very confused views on things like universal basic income and sort of some of these social programs that are like, oh, don't worry, we'll just start paying people not to work. There's some interesting things about them that maybe they've got lower overhead, and there's some things that you could imagine being interesting about those. But I at their core, I think the vast majority of people don't just want to like get a free paycheck and sit around doing nothing, right? I think that there's a lot of dignity in work. Right, Khalil Gibran once said, "Work is love made visible." Right, the famous poet philosopher, and I think people actually want to have the agency, the self-worth, et cetera, that comes from work. And so I think we might need to think about different ways to allow people to express that work. But I don't think it's as simple as like, oh, now everyone's going to work 3 days a week, whatever. Like, I don't think that that's how people are wired. I don't think that's the history of the world. There have been plenty of leaps in productivity. We had a whole industrialization age, right? I mean, if you go back 150 years, more than 50% of the population made a living on the farm. Today, it's less than 2% of the population. Like, we are like, we have gone through big changes. So let's just be careful about not like going crazy, about like that. This is like the sky is falling, the end of the world. So I want to just say that because I think that's really important. I think AI has the potential to be completely transformative. I think it's a huge, revolution, however you want to describe it. I think it's going to be incredibly powerful. I already see it in my world, and I think we're barely scratching the surface for what it will do. I'm very excited for the kinds of things it can do, in particular for small businesses. I see the things that Greeley spends her time on, and that other small business owners spend their time on, that are kind of rote, and I think they would love to spend more time selling books or selling coffee or whatever it is.
Sure.
And so I think that there's an opportunity for that. I think a little bit of an increase in productivity isn't such a bad thing. If you think about where we are with our national debt right now, we can default. That doesn't seem like a good option. We can inflate our way out of it. That's a very painful option. See Venezuela or Argentina, whatever. Or we can increase productivity and grow our way out of it. And I think that AI is part of, not the only solution to, but part of growing our way out of that. So now you mentioned this, Adrian, and I do want to hit it straight on. I think what we learned in the deindustrialization of particularly the Midwest is that these sort of very lightweight retraining programs don't work, right? And we, for the most part, ignored the fact that there were these massive disruptions in our economy. And we thought that because goods and services got cheaper, people would be fine, right? And people were saying, if you go back and look at some of the history here, people were saying that very explicitly. Hey, you don't need as good a job because the TV is going to be less expensive now, and the things you want to buy every day are going to be less expensive. And I think that just simply was a misread of human nature and sort of what people wanted to do. And ultimately, it didn't work because we basically piled debt on the middle class. We talk a lot about this in the book as well. And we've sort of reached the end of that, right? I mean, U.S. is a consumer economy. It's 2/3 of our GDP. And we really just sort of leveraged the hell out of the middle class. So I think we should learn from that. And I think we should be really thoughtful about how we approach the training, retraining, building opportunities for people in our economy. I would love to start with ideas like, I think every junior college should be free. I think every trade school should be free. Those are the first places I would spend the AI dividend, if you will.
Yeah.
We still need people to do all sorts of different things. By the way, there's tradespeople right now building these AI data centers and are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because we just simply don't have enough of them.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to sort of start with that. And then I'd also like to just be open to the idea that there are all sorts of business ideas that people are ingenious, right? They will continue to come up with these ideas. And our job as a society should be to encourage that and to stay out of their way, right? So I think a lot about how do we take some of the AI dividend and redeploy it to support small business creation, and how do we take some of what's going on in government and basically get them to get their hands off of everything that seems to be going on, and not put up so many barriers to people starting a business.
Wow. We love you. And there's just no doubt about it.
And by the way, if I can, while we're talking, can I just put a pitch in for something else? We learned this over COVID. I don't know why it sort of went away after that, but there are so many things that require a hyper local license that make no effing sense, right? It is, and we suspended a little bit of that because it turns out if you can cut hair in Boulder County, maybe it's okay to cut hair in Weld County, right? And a lot of these laws, we talk a little bit about this too in the book, date back 150 years. Okay, I get it. 150 years ago, I didn't, if I lived in Longmont, Colorado, I didn't know anyone. I may not have even known anyone in Denver, right? That's 50 miles away. So I get why, no. I wanted to know that, this person was able to paint my nails in Longmont because someone I tried. Tom down at the whatever office was able to say, yeah, Adrian knows what he's doing. Today, that makes absolutely no sense. Like, what could we just get rid of all of that stuff? Yeah. And by the way, it disproportionately affects people in the middle class because many of these jobs are the types of jobs that are populated by people in the middle class. I would love to see all of that stuff go away. We should have standards, just make them national standards. If I have a license to cut hair, I should be able to cut hair anywhere I want in the US. If I have a license to be an electrician, I should be able to be an electrician anywhere in the US, right? Like things like that just are impediments to the capitalist system. And one of the things that is sort of counterintuitive, right? Because we think about like capitalism run amok is extractive, but actually we in some cases need to like take some of the guardrails off of capitalism, right? I mean, there are places where the government steps in and says, actually, you can't do these things, right? By the way, not to mention bailing out too big to fail banks and things like that, right? There were no repercussions. And that basically started the populist movement, right? And we basically had no, the people that were harmed in the GFC were the people that took the loans out, not the people that sort of swindled them into taking the loans out. And I don't mean to take any personal agency away from the individuals who made decisions to borrow money, but I just, as an example, like hundreds of thousands, millions of people lost their homes, lost their credit, et cetera. I think one person went to jail at one of these guys. Like it just was so asymmetric, and the government bailed out AIG and all the banks.
Yeah.
And of course that sounds wrong. Like no wonder people are mad about that.
Yeah.
Why don't you run for governor?
No way I would get elected to that. We have two wonderful choices in certainly on the Democratic side in Phil and Michael. So,
do you know Stephen Tebow?
I do know Steve Tebow. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good buddy of ours, and at his Christmas party, I was very proud of him because he's a Republican, tried and true. And he brought Paulus and another guy out on the stage and just said, "These guys, I vote for people, not for parties." And these guys, and I just love the fact that we've got the chance in this state and in this country to take control of our own destiny and vote good people instead of trying to be so conspiracy and anger driven. What do you think about that before we get out of here?
From your lips to God's ears, right? Like I wish we could get to that. I completely agree. And by the way, I love people like. By the way, Steve owns a house in Longmont too. Love people like Steve who are willing, or Dan Cruz, or other people that are sort of relatively high profile. Bob Yates, right, who are relatively high profile Republicans in sort of the older sense of Republicans. Not necessarily MAGA Republicans, but willing to stand up and say, hey. I'm voting. Yeah, I'm voting for the people that I think are best. And I think that's how we should all be.
There we go. Well, we love you. We're going to Contact Mapping and Now.Site sponsor the show. And as a result, we sent one of these to Brad. We're going to send one to you.
I love it. He and I will have to wear them at the same time.
Yeah. So we'll do that. And just know that we love you. And we've got another radio show called Longmont Matters Radio Show. And I think we ought to do a simulcast out of composition book and interview your wife. So
I would love that.
I'm going to send you an email and float that boat and see if you want to do it. And Michelle and I will put that on, and Adrian can host it down there because they're all young and it'll be awesome. But Seth,
let's do it from the shop, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what we'll do.
That idea. Yeah, we'll. I'm sure Greeley would enjoy doing that as well. It's great. Thank you for including. I love. I feel like the work that Greeley and I do is very complimentary. And I'm just so proud of the work that she's done. Right. I mean, I think people are very quick to give me credit for the work that she's done. Right. Which I think is a mistake because I haven't had anything really to do with it other than being here to support and, recycling the occasional box and putting together the occasional flat pack piece of furniture.
Yep. Well, we love you. You are a very good supply clerk down there. And we thank you for being on the show. Who's next week? Do we know?
We have Nick Gray, who is awesome. Do you know who Nick Gray is? He's on Twitter.
No, I don't know. I don't know Nick. Is he a local guy as well?
No, he's based in Austin. Okay. He is the most full-hearted, just awesome nerd you've ever met in your life. He wrote a book about throwing cocktail parties. He's like this big kind of like networking community guy. I love him to death, and he's great. So it's going to be a great show next week. It was an awesome show this week. Seth, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.
All right, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.